Well, hello. No, no, North Dakota is not at war. No, the revolution has not started. But my neighbors across the street are setting off fireworks. And they're really loud. And yeah, I had a nicely researched video all about reading on a screen versus reading on paper. And I feel like the sound of fireworks is going to undermine it. And yep, my fault. I waited until Saturday night to record the audio. But it's also past 9 o'clock, so it seems like it's too late. 3rd of July, I get that, but yeah. And truth is, I'm not a fireworks person. I like the chemistry of fireworks. I even enjoy a fireworks show. One of the things I'd like to do is try to photograph some decent fireworks. But I'm just not a fan of that week leading up to 4th of July being fireworks every night. Because really, are you celebrating? Or are you just letting off big bangy things? So I thought rather than undermine my researched video with that, I would do something spontaneous. So I'll tell you what I did today, and then I'll get into the topic of the video. So what I did today is I actually drove over to Raymond, North Dakota, and took some footage. Now, sadly, most of it was not with my camcorder because I was trying to do photographs and video. So I just used my camera, so it's going to be a little shakier than I'd like. But they were doing the Rain Gala Days. Gala Days is how they pronounce it there. And it's like a big annual celebration the end of June every year. And so I took footage of the Gala Days. I took footage around their abandoned school, and just around town a little bit. And then I have some driving footage too. And I thought I could splice it together and do a video about rain. So look for that when I have some time. I'm not sure if I have audio to go with it. I may have messed up a setting on my camera because it's not one I usually use for. Okay, I do use it for video, but I don't use it for the sound. So I'm not sure. So I may be adding more narration than I planned. I planned a certain amount of just natural sound, but we'll see. Whatever. So it was kind of fun. I didn't stay for the whole thing. There was a rodeo at 2, and then there's a street dance at night. And I feel like there's something else going on before the street dance. I came home. Hey, the fireworks have stopped. Well, no, they haven't. They're still going on. They just seem to stop and start. Oh, they must be bright. I have my curtains drawn, but I see lights reflecting on the inside of my curtains. Oh, maybe I'll take a peek out and just see who's letting them off, just which specific neighbor. All right, so I was blaming the wrong neighbor. Interesting. Oh, now somebody's honking their horn. There are times when I really hate living in town. I like the convenience of living in town. I like to be able to walk to everything, but sometimes I hate the noise of other people. Oh, and I hear other people around town are letting off fireworks. Yay. Just gets better and better. This afternoon, the neighborhood dogs were all at war and barking at each other and just like, shut up. Anyway, so now my anti-people rant is over. Let's get into why I started teaching. So I didn't really have it in mind at the beginning to become a teacher. What I had in mind at the beginning was more, for a long time I thought I'd be a computer programmer. My family had bought a Texas Instrument. It was a TI-99 4A, and I enjoyed writing programs on it. The operating system was TI Basic. You would type your programs. You could save them on cassette. Later on, we bought the expansion box, which was a gigantic monster, and then you could save them on a 5 1/4 floppy disk. Programs, they were fairly simple, but it was fun. And I'd started originally by editing programs, and then I moved on and started writing my own. Oh, by the way, I'm pulling off here into Richardson. Basically, I just needed to get out and stretch my legs. Also just realized, now that I'm almost 5 minutes into it, that I've been recording this entire time on a built-in microphone, not on the Yeti, so I guess you get to hear the sound difference. So I'm pulling off in Richardson, North Dakota. Now that's kind of an interesting town to visit. There's not lots of business section. I don't think during this tour I'll visit it, but on the way back, I actually will drive down Main Street. But I am going to go up on this trip to see the school that they're building, because they desperately needed to build a new school. I know some towns say that and don't actually need a new school. Richardson needed a new school. Only the most miserly, kid-hating person would disagree with that. So, anyway, to get back into the topic, why I became a teacher, I liked programming. It was very satisfying, and I taught myself a lot. I do the sprites and so on. Must have visited the school first. Anyway, learned a lot of things. TI Extended, Basic. I really wanted to learn assembler, although I didn't get a chance to do that until college. But it just was interesting. And then I was in a group in not high school, middle school, junior high school, 6th through 8th grade, where I was going, where I was able to program there too, and I was able to do TRS-80 basic, and look up the Radio Shack TRS-80. You'll see what I was working with. That was what our computer lab was. When I got to high school, which was in a different school district because we moved, I got to use an Apple IIe because that was our computer lab there. But anyway, it was interesting just to be able to do that programming and solve problems and get the computer to do things that you don't think they should be able to do. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the challenge, learning new commands, learning new ways to do things, learning faster ways to do things. And that stood me well as I got older. Now, when I went to college and took programming classes there, I found out how little I knew, of course. But at the same time, I found out that, yeah, you actually did learn something. So this is the shell of Richardson's new high school. Looks like it's going to be a 2-story building. I don't know this for sure, but I think they're going to bring the elementary over here. The elementary currently is in a old, kind of sad building over in Taylor, North Dakota, and I think they're going to consolidate onto one campus. That's a good cost saving, so it makes sense. It's one of those consolidated school districts, if you're wondering, where Richardson and Taylor used to each have their own high school and elementary school, and they consolidated, and part of it was to agree that, okay, we'll put the high school here and the elementary here. Just kind of, it's like when a school dies, the town loses its heart and the town dries up. So that's what they're trying to avoid when they do these kind of consolidations. It's a way to sweeten the deal and get two schools to agree that, yeah, we got to do it. And usually the bigger one is the one that gets the high school, and the smaller one gets the elementary school. And then after a while, they discover that, yeah, it's getting kind of expensive to run both. We better shut down the elementary and bring them all over to the same building. Probably almost sounds like I've had experience with this, and yes, I have. Well, anyway, so to get back on topic, I wander off the topic all the time when I do these unscripted videos. Just, you probably know that by now if you're a fan of my driving videos. Anyway, I moved after 8th grade to a more rural high school. It was a bit smaller. Still in Pennsylvania, just a more rural area. And we were living on a gravel road out in the country. Not farmers or anything, just my parents wanted to live in the country. They still live there. And so it was a mile walk to the bus every day, and then, so I wasn't in any extracurriculars or anything. So I kept my dream, freshman year, took all the standard freshman classes, Algebra 2, Physical Science, whatever. And the whole idea was I was still going to be a computer programmer. Right, so I'm going to fast forward a couple of years to college. Basically, probably I can't remember if it was fall of my senior year or spring of my junior year. But anyway, I took a class called Issues in Education. And I don't like to cite people by name unless they're public figures, but we'll just say I had a professor in that class who did things a little differently. And one of the first things she asked was, what inspired you to be a teacher? Which is a pretty typical in an education class question that you're asked. And you get, as you go around the class, people said, oh yeah, this teacher really inspired me, and this teacher did these wonderful things. And she got to me, and I had to go back to 10th grade. In 10th grade, I had this geometry teacher who really didn't know geometry. In fact, once we realized he didn't know geometry, one of the things we started doing just to distract him, get him off point, really confuse him, waste class time, was we'd ask questions. And we would make sure those weren't questions that were from the homework. Because what he would do, if you asked questions about the homework, he'd just open up the solutions manual. He'd copy out the solution, and okay, that didn't help at all. Because he couldn't explain why. He could just, here's the solution. So what we started doing is asking him questions where, well, what if this happened in this problem? And, it's kind of a bad thing, but that we were doing that. But, that whole help the people who are weaker and whatever. But, it's kind of questionable who's weaker between students and teacher because, weak teacher, but students don't have the power. And did you hear that awkward pause there? And I made that short just because I didn't want you all to think, wait, did he just die? He would pause sometimes for like 5 minutes and just stare at the solutions manual. And then he'd copy out the solution anyway. But hey, 5 minutes of class time wasted. So, we're teenagers. We were happy with that. That was a victory. And as I was sitting there through that, a couple of things would come to mind. First of all, I had started taking my own notes the night before he would teach a section because I knew he would be useless. So I would teach myself geometry. And geometry, to this day, is my least favorite branch of math. And I don't know if it's his fault, because there is cool stuff in geometry, or if it just doesn't work with me. Because I know I've met students. I've been teaching for years, and I've been a math teacher also. Some of them are geometry people, some of them are algebra people. But anyway, geometry's always been my absolute least favorite. I hated geometry. But besides that, what I would think was, wow, how many other teachers in this country are like that? And that got on that whole patriotic thing that, because there's always stuff in the media about how the teachers in this country are terrible, and that's just a standard fixture. And as a teacher, I've had to come to terms with that. The fact that basically the media and the public think I'm the enemy and I am destroying the country. That's what you read about what I do. But, I was young and idealistic then. Now I just say, who gives a shit what you think? But back then I had a little more, ooh, I can change it. I can make it better. And so I thought, teaching wouldn't be bad. And the other reason teaching appealed to me, and this sounds terrible, is I thought to myself, my God, if this man can do it, anyone can do it. I have job security. And that's what brought me into teaching. Now, admittedly, in college, I started as a math major, discovered that it really wasn't my bag. I switched to being a physics major, and I was a lot happier there. And that's my degree, is in physics. Now, I'm in a rural state. They really don't care that I have a physics degree, so I teach a lot of things. But I do teach physics. And I'm in a big enough school that I get to teach physics every year. So I guess that's something. But that really is what led me into teaching. Sad as it sounds. So kind of stuns me right now to realize I'm talking about events that occurred back in the 90s, because I finished college in fall of 1998. My first full-time teaching job was in fall of 1999, and I spent spring of 1998 substitute teaching, and especially doing some long-term subbing and teaching summer school and working at a fast food restaurant. But here's what's kind of wild. I student taught in I was told it was a challenging position, but I really didn't think so, and I still don't think so, especially considering what I do. It was at a high school. I had 3 different classes I had to prep for, and the professor that placed me there apologized profusely, and he said, "But I think you'll be able to handle it, but this is a really big load." And the truth is, when I took my very first job, my first full-time job, I had 6 different preps because I was the science department grades 7 through 12. And wow, I spent the first 2 years, and this was in a rural North Dakota school. One of these days, I'm going to take a drive up there because next year I will be really close to it. For a class I'll be taking in the summer, I'll be doing a driving video like this, only to Minot, North Dakota, and that's not where I had my first job because I've never taught in a school that big. I taught in West Hope, North Dakota, if you're interested. And actually, one of my students is currently the science teacher there, and I apologize profusely to her because back then I was a god-awful science teacher. But anyway, so for the first 3 years of my full-time career, I taught in West Hope, North Dakota. I even had a math class periodically, but I taught the entire science program because I was the only science teacher. Now, I will admit it was a pretty nice science room. It didn't have the most up-to-date equipment, but it was a nice room. It's honestly better than what I'm teaching in now. I just think of all the things I could do with that room. But I am where I am, and I think it was a good move to get away from there. But first 2 years were really frustrating. I couldn't manage a classroom. I couldn't manage my life. I couldn't manage anything. I remember starting school that second year of teaching, and I was desperate for cash. I had eaten up all my savings because what West Hope did, just like the school where I teach now actually, is you're actually on a 9-month contract. So in your 9th month of work, I had set it up so I would get paid for 12 months, and I figured I'd get a check, every month. But no. They give you all of them in June, and I was so undisciplined that first year. I spent it all, and by the end of August, I'm like, oh, I don't get paid till September 15th. And where I teach now, it would have been even worse because we're only paid monthly. Where I was teaching in West Hope, they paid twice a month. So that was a thin time, and I definitely learned my lesson. Definitely skipped a few meals too, but that's another story. But anyway, the big thing was I was really struggling to manage a classroom. And by spring, I was seriously thinking I'm going to get out of teaching. Well, one of my colleagues decided to help me out, and I'm not going to blame her for this at all. What happened here is my fault, because I was an idiot in a lot of ways. I'm young and immature. I won't say, I was an evil person or anything. Well, she found a lab on the internet that was, and we didn't have internet yet at school, but so I didn't know all these fact-checking things. And I was just young and naive. Well, she found a lab for a really cool experiment. And what it was they called it the snaps. And it was touch powder. Ammonium triiodide, if you're interested. And anyway, I discovered I could make it. Now, even back then, I knew always, always, always. Sorry, I just knocked a stack of books over because I'm cleaning up my living room and sorting books. Anyway, I knew back then, always, always, always test the lab before you have the kids do it. So that's what I did. I followed the instructions. I mixed the ingredients. I let them dry. And then I invited her in to see it. And I said, well, let's see how it works. So I picked up the beaker, wanted to do what the lab said and scoop out the crystals. Well, I would say it left an impression, but it wasn't the kind of show I'd planned on giving. Because the whole beaker exploded straight into my face. And wouldn't you know it, I've always been kind of picky about you will wear goggles. The one time I didn't was that time. And so it exploded straight into my face. So she, total silence. Then she's like, what do I do? I said, get me the eye wash. So I started eye washing myself. She went and called the ambulance. Some of the other teachers came in. Of course, I ran the eye wash out. I had one of the other teachers. I had some bottles of water in the storage room. So I had one of the other teachers get it and just start eye washing me. Ambulance eye washed me most of the way to Minot. At Minot, they eye washed me some more. Surprise, surprise. And went to an eye doctor in Minot. He looked at it. He took out a few pieces of glass, because, it was in a glass beaker. And then he said, oh, this is beyond my skill set, which I am told was quite a thing for him to admit, because I guess he was kind of arrogant. I didn't know. I never had a doctor. Or, I didn't wear glasses. So, I ended up on an airplane, for the first time in my life, actually, flying to Minneapolis, where a specialist looked at me. And the specialist looked at my eyes. He was able to pull out the glass, and that was 2.5 hours, I will just tell you, 2.5 hours of pure hell. So he'd tell me to look left, he'd pull glass for a while, he'd tell me to look right, he'd pull glass for a while, and at this time I hadn't had any real painkillers. He called me tough guy a few times, so that was nice. I was in kind of a thing that would hold my head. I guess I could jerk straight back, but I couldn't jerk side to side, and I think it was to prevent damage to my eyes. And it took everything I could to put up with that while he would pull stuff out of my eyeballs. And at the end, that was a long time, especially when you can't really see and you don't know if you'll ever see again. I asked him if I would ever see again, and he just says, well, at this point, I don't know. So that was uncomfortable. I ended up staying with a brother of a colleague from where I was teaching. He was, really kind to take me in because he definitely didn't have to do that. And he was really religious. He prayed before I went to bed, and I was pretty much more religious back then. But anyway, afterwards, I'm there in the dark, a little high on pain medicine, because by then I'd been able to get some good drugs. But the thing that kept going through my mind was, what if I don't get my eyesight back? I won't be able to teach. What do I do for a living? Well, that was a little terrifying, but the thought that kept coming back into my mind more and more was, I won't be able to teach anymore. How will I be able to teach if I'm blind? And I realized that I'm going to miss teaching. So then the next thing came up was, why am I such an awful teacher? Why was I ready to leave teaching? And honestly, if this accident wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't be a teacher now. So the next few nights were spent in a lot of recrimination and seeing a lot of the things I had been doing wrong. Some of them had been pointed out to me, and I was just too proud to admit, hey, I'm doing this wrong. Some of them were things that I had been doing wrong and just didn't know I was doing wrong. And of course, I've been learning more and more about teaching ever since, so it's, I'm hoping my last year of teaching will be my best year. But anyway, I just got a big dose of humility there because I realized a lot of the problems I had with teaching were problems that I had created for myself. I don't know what it's like in other states, but if you can manage a classroom, most kids here in North Dakota will learn. Most of them will behave. Most of them will cooperate with the activities that you have. Yes, occasionally you get that kid that just refuses to learn. You get them. But most kids are decent. They're people. They want to learn. They want to have a good life. They want to do better. So, yeah, a lot of the problems I was having I created myself. I just didn't know how to teach. And that was a hard pill to swallow. Now, yes, I did eventually get my eyesight back. I went back home not knowing if the eyesight would return. It took a few weeks for it to return, but a couple of neat things happened. One of them was a few students came and mowed my lawn while I was gone, so that was nice. I was renting a house. By the way, $150 to rent a 2-bedroom house on Main Street. And it was furnished. Oh boy, I wish I could have that kind of rent. Well, I guess I don't have rent anymore. I have a mortgage. But anyway, I had a lot of time to think that summer. And I also took some classes. And one of the classes that was really good was a physics class. Now, I think I told you at the beginning of this long, drawn-out story, I have a physics degree. So I was pretty sure I knew physics. I took a class, the professor was from Yugoslavia, which at that time I think it was still Yugoslavia. Anyway, she'd grown up in Yugoslavia, so whatever splits had happened, it was still Yugoslavia at the time. But it was kind of interesting because she taught out of a book written by Lillian McDermott. And it was written not for physics majors. It was written for elementary education, people just looking for a general physics class. And students were asked to construct their own knowledge. So we did the unit on circuitry. And circuitry really isn't hard, I didn't think. Well, I learned differently. We would build circuits, we would test circuits. But it started out so basic, it was just like, in this circuit, which will be the brightest light bulb? I found out I didn't know as much as I thought I did. I knew the formulas, but I didn't have that intuitive sense for how the electrons flow in a circuit. And I got a big awakening about teaching. First of all, students need to actually do physics or chemistry or whatever class it is you're teaching. Students don't learn a whole lot by taking notes. They'll learn a little bit. There are times when you just need to do that. They learn a lot more by doing. And what they really learn a lot by doing is when you confront their misconceptions with something that shows that those misconceptions are wrong. And then they have to construct a new mental model to explain it. Another thing that I discovered from that class is it's really helpful to have students actually explain what they've learned, rather than just learn something. Put it in their own words. We were asked in this class a lot of times to write what were called operational definitions. That was really tough. Well, anyway, I went back to school the following year, and I have to say I did a lot better that last year. I spent way too much time at school. That was one of my downfalls. But, I was much better at classroom management, partly because I was doing a better job teaching, and just, if kids are busy, and kids are happy, or at least feel like they're doing something productive, they're less likely to cause trouble. when they're just copying notes, they cause trouble. So I had a much better year. But I realized that I wasn't going to last there. I needed to get out and spread my wings. So I spread my wings, moved on to Turtle Lake, North Dakota, and I spent 3 years there as well. Turtle Lake was a little bigger than West Hope. It was basically the same idea. It was a small school. I was the only science teacher. I taught grades 7 through 12 science. And all I taught was science. We go through Minot next year on my trip up to the class there. I will go through Turtle Lake. I'll show it to you. I'll take the slight detour. It's a pretty drive, and of course I want to go stop in Turtle Lake anyway. Turtle Lake was a good experience for me. This was a place where I started to mature as a teacher and figure out who I was as a teacher. I'm somebody who is slow to learn things, so I was slow to learn how to teach. Most people start to figure it out by their second year. It took me longer. But one of the things that happened when I got to Turtle Lake, I didn't like the textbooks that were there. They were awful. I had looked at them for my program in West Hope, actually, that series, and I just thought, oh my God, hell no. And then I get to Turtle Lake, and there they are. So I did a little gamble. I decided I'm going to pull out the standards, look at them, and that's what I'm going to go with. Now, the North Dakota science standards at that time were not that great, but I what am I trying to say here? But, at least they were direction. But the other thing that I had discovered was that, hey, there are national organizations with some ideas. One of the really good ones was Project 2061. In fact, I devoured the book Science for All Americans. And, fun fact, my classroom in Turtle Lake had the internet. Now, yes, in my last year in West Hope, I had the internet there too. I had the internet for 9/11, which was... That's a story for another time. That was definitely the hardest day of my teaching career. But anyway, I had the internet in Turtle Lake, so I was able to look things up, and I read Science for All Americans originally online, but I eventually purchased a copy. It's actually, I'm looking at my bookshelf. I think it's actually at school. I think I put most of my Project 2061 stuff there. But what I really liked was Project 2061 had really good, clear science standards. A lot clearer and better than what North Dakota had at the time. While I was in Turtle Lake, I had the opportunity to take part in writing North Dakota's science standards, which right now are being phased out. I'm not part of the newest iteration, but the newest iteration are going to follow NGSS, which isn't the greatest set of science standards, but it's better than what we have and better than what I helped write. So I'm all for that. While I was in Turtle Lake, I really got comfortable creating lessons around standards, because this is important for a time-saving thing, finding lessons based around standards and adapting them to whatever you needed. The classroom there had been recently renovated, which was a big change from West Hope. The lab was not as, let's say, well furnished, but it was more up to date. I didn't like the carpet in it though, but that was a cost-saving thing. Yes, the lab was carpeted, and it was pretty nasty by the time I left Turtle Lake. I applied a lot of lessons I'd learned. I'd gotten better at classroom management. I still wasn't perfect. I'm still not perfect, and I don't know who is. But you'll learn as you go along. And of course, it really helps, just that age thing, just being visibly older than your students. Well, as much as I may joke about looking like I'm still in high school, the gray hair kind of gives me away. So high school kids don't think I'm one of them anymore. They don't have older brothers or sisters my age either. So, in fact, none of them were born when I started teaching. But, I was still fairly young when I was in Turtle Lake. It was, it was about like West Hope as far as the town, but a little more Main Street. I actually became a homeowner for the first time when I was in Turtle Lake, which was a mistake. My landlord really wanted to sell the house I was in, and I felt pressured into buying it. In retrospect, I didn't need to buy it. But at the time, I felt like, ooh, I better buy this or I don't know where I'm going to live. So $10,000 later, I'm a homeowner of a 1920s bungalow. It was a very nice house. I wouldn't mind owning it now. Had a lot of features that this tiny house I live in now does not have. But it was the wrong time in my life to buy a house. As far as the teaching goes, I started to wish, that I could teach physics every year. I had taken enough math classes by then. No Child Left Behind had started to kick in. Under the new law, I was still certified to teach math. I'd been working on a master's degree in math. I never actually finished that, which is a story I should tell sometime too. That one is totally my fault. I should have finished it, and part of me regrets I didn't. Part of me, right at this exact instant in time, is really grateful that I didn't finish it, even though I'd be making more money right now. Because I don't want to teach some of the classes that I would end up teaching if I had finished it. But anyway, I started to look toward the long-term future. I started to think, is Turtle Lake really going to be around when you retire? Now, I'll be honest, right now, I think West Hope and Turtle Lake are still going to be around when I retire. They're going to be small, but I think they're going to be around. Turtle Lake especially. West Hope, there's some question. And the reason is location. They're just far enough away. Kind of like the school where I teach now. Now, but at the time, it wasn't looking like that. And I just started thinking more and more, I'd like to not be teaching this many classes, because doing that much work for 6 different preps is a lot of work. And I was just feeling overwhelmed. So I moved on to Harvey, North Dakota. In fact, I interviewed in Harvey and turned them down. They called me back a while later and asked me if I'd reconsider, and at that point some things had happened locally, personal things, which are beside the point of this video, but some personal things, and I said, okay, I'll take it. And Harvey was a big jump up. Now, I had student taught and substitute taught in schools much larger than Harvey. But Harvey had around 450, 475, somewhere in that neighborhood, students right at that time. So, I had 2 sections of physical science. I did not teach chemistry. There was another guy that taught that. He taught chemistry and biology and some other stuff. I taught physics. I had, I don't remember what it's called anymore. It was a physical science class, but it was for special ed students. And then I taught kind of a algebra 1 in 2 years sort of a class, so students that struggled. And I taught an informal geometry, which is also for students that struggled. That was quite a battle, but a good learning experience, because I learned a lot of things about dealing with that group of students that I had just not been forced to learn before. I learned the importance of engagement and that physical hands-on aspect.
And also that knowing that, oh, this teacher actually cares rather than just lectures and doesn't really give a rip about us as people. Those were all powerful things I learned by teaching those classes. So I'm glad I got the chance. But several of my substitutes, when I had to be away for various things, told me that I should protest my schedule. And, it's true. I kind of had an overload of those kind of classes compared to other teachers of that school. But I would have probably stayed there if the principal had stayed there. The principal left at the end of that year, and he was a principal who had really done wonderful things for that school. He'd been just great for making that school better. And he went on to become a superintendent doesn't matter where, but somewhere else. And there were a lot of issues between the school board and teachers in Harvey. And I just wasn't into drama. And I thought to myself, why not? Just go elsewhere. And I started looking. Now, in the process of looking, one of the things that happened, the state came in and got involved in our teacher negotiations for our contract, which only happens when you go to impasse. And I was dumb enough to speak up publicly. And when I say dumb enough, I'm not sorry I spoke up. I just feel like it wasn't well thought out. I basically said that, this is the ugliest school I've ever been in, which was true. I've never worked in a school before or since that goes to impasse every year, where there is just such blatant distrust between teachers and school board. Well, anyway, I got splashed on the front page of all the big newspapers in North Dakota. I got hate mail, really nasty, scary hate mail. I also got job offers, which is a little scary because I just thought, oh my God, what kind of desperate school calls somebody who says something like that? But I was looking. I just couldn't bring myself to apply to any of those schools that called me up with job offers. So I ended up applying out west. I figured out west they don't really care. Now, I was smart enough to bring it up in job interviews, or stupid enough, maybe I shouldn't have said a thing. But I interviewed in Beach, North Dakota. They turned me down, but they strung me along for quite a long while. I think they knew I was really interested in the school. I mean, I took a tour of the school. I toured the town. It's impressive. I mean, if you want to see a nice high school, go visit Beach, North Dakota. I'm no longer interested in a job there because I'm relatively happy where I'm at, but that is a nice high school there. But like I said, I was turned down. And then the job where I'm at opened up midsummer. Now, I'd started looking before that. I'd started looking during the spring. I looked at one school. I called the principal and talked to him, and wow, he was so negative about his own school. Like, okay, and you notice I'm not mentioning what school it was, although that principal is no longer there and was actually fired later on in his career as a superintendent. So, there's that. But talking to him, I like, okay, not going here. There was another one I was very interested in, but the salary was really low. I knew the housing was iffy, and it was also a really small school, which didn't have much potential. And as it turned out, I was right, because it closed that year, mainly because they couldn't fill the position I was interested in. But hey, I think they would have closed a few years later anyway. So anyway, I interviewed here, where I'm at now. It was interesting. It was a very hot day when I showed up. I I always interview, wear the jacket and tie and everything, dressed to the nines. But it was so flippin' hot in there because they were actually repairing the air conditioning the day I interviewed. They said, you can take off your jacket. I'm like, do I take it off or is this a test? But I took it off because it was flippin' hot in there. And the interview went very well. I came away with a good feeling about it. One of the things that struck me was, wow, this is really on the edge of the earth. And yet, 12 years later, here I still am. So I suppose, good question would be why. I ask myself that a lot. Part of it is, you get to a certain age and you're like, okay, I really seriously just need to settle down in a location. So I've settled down. I bought a house. The house I live in now, 672 square feet, but I'm single, that's all I need. I could have a better floor plan, but it is what it is. But, yeah, I'm reasonably happy. I have the freedom to do what I want. I have... I have pretty comfortable standard of living. I have enough money to buy not only the things I need, but some of the things I want. Never all the things you want, but, life. I'm pretty well off here. I'm teaching mostly the classes I like, not all of them. That's one of those trade-offs that you have to make. And I'm probably going to stay here. I always look and see what else is open. There were a few job openings this year that I was curious about and I looked at and took really seriously, but none to the point that I pursued them any further. So you're probably at this point saying, why are you still teaching? You never really addressed that. So why don't I address that now? A lot of times, really, when you look back, you don't fall into a career necessarily by a plan. A lot of times where you end up is by default. It's like the stars align. You follow the path that makes the most sense to you at the time. And, oh, wow, I've been doing this 20 years. Or however many years. For me, it's 20 years. I've been teaching 20 years, and, at this point, picking something else would be a gamble. And I'm a little bit averse to gambling. Definitely don't like the mathematics of gambling. But besides that point, I go back to that raw emotion I felt back when I thought I would lose my eyesight forever. And I was afraid I would not be able to teach anymore. So I'll tell you why I like teaching, why I'm in teaching. Yes, there are perks to it. June, July, and August are 3 of the perks. The decent hours are some of the perks, although they're not as decent as you would think, which I'll get into in my video on why people are not going into teaching. But what I really like is that moment when a student suddenly understands something. When a student suddenly sees things in a new light. When a student says, wow, thank you. And I don't care, if a kid says, well, that was a great lesson right that day. It means a lot more when they come back to me when they're older and say, thank you for doing this. When they've had a little bit of a chance to develop some perspective. And I know the majority of them who may actually thank me or may have actually gotten something out of my class, most of them aren't going to ever say anything. Honestly, I contacted a few of my former teachers. Most of them, no. I never said anything to them. And I know it's the same thing as me. I know that sometimes to do a good job, I have to make kids hate me. Most of the time, that'll be in the short term. Sometimes that's forever. I'll go out on a limb and guess that some of you out there listening to this are parents. So you probably know what I'm talking about. The child in front of you is not the finished product. It's the adult they're going to be. If I can get students to weigh evidence in forming their opinions, if I can get students to check sources, if I can get students to think through methodology when they hear something, I think I've won. More importantly, I'd like to get them to think with the scientific method. I'd like them to know some basic science. But that's really what I'm doing. I have a t-shirt. I wore it in one of my Pens in Use videos where it says, grow those dendrites. If you look at how the brain works, it's all made up of neurons. There are axons and dendrites for each neuron. Neuron is a cell in the brain. What the dendrites do is they connect to other neurons. And what learning really is growing those connections. And the more connections you have, that's going to increase your IQ. That's going to increase your ability to think. That's what's going to increase your knowledge. That's what I'm all about. Now, I want you to be able to think a little about conservation of energy, or think a little bit about, what do these graphs look like, or think a little bit about, this is connected to this idea. And I would, it'd be nice if some of my students would decide to go on and become science teachers because I really inspired them, or become scientists or engineers because I really inspired them. And yeah, I have those students. But really, my big thing is I would like them to walk out of my classroom able to think for themselves, and more importantly, think with evidence. And when I start looking at it that way, it puts my classroom practice in a whole new light. My first year, we'll just take biology for an example. Well, I don't care what class. Actually, let's take them all. My first year teaching, I hardly did any labs. I did a few. Every class had a few. But, like the biology, which is the one I was going to start with, I did about 2. They were dissections. And there was one that was just god-awful. It put me off labs for a long time. Here's what labs should be about. First of all, they should give a student a practical experience. But second of all, they should force students to confront evidence, especially if it's evidence that contradicts their beliefs ahead of time. And most of us are a mess with our beliefs, with what we know. We think it's all evidence-based, but it's not. And we think we know why we believe what we believe, but we really don't. I'm still working on that as far as my labs, but one of the great things with labs is, here's the evidence, what's your conclusion based on the evidence? And I love, love, love pooling class data together. Because not only do they get to see the evidence, they get to see, it's not just one experiment, it's overwhelming evidence. And sometimes you get one of those labs, you're like, oh, God, that didn't work at all. You get those, too. So at root, what I'm coming back to is, what teaching really offers is a chance to touch the future. Now, I know my little corner of North Dakota, is a little corner of North Dakota. In the great scheme of things, most of you really don't give a darn or a thought about where I live. Most of you have never heard of it, except through my videos. But people all across the country, like me, are touching the future every day. And we can teach a generation of students to think critically, to weigh evidence, to question authority, especially based on evidence, to make humane decisions based on evidence and knowledge. Or we can sit back and say, let the fun take over. Play some video games. Whatever your church says, that goes. Forget the science. It's all about what you feel, man. It's all about what your Bible says. And this is going to get political for a minute, but I see a president right now who opposes scientific evidence in areas that he doesn't like, particularly climate science. But there's a lot of economic areas where he doesn't like evidence either. And I see a lot of people love the fact that he's outspoken and bold. And they confuse that with he knows what the hell he's talking about. Our country really values substance over... I'm sorry. Our country really values presentation over substance. And what we have in the White House right now is a symptom of that. Now, I don't care if my students end up voting Democrat or Republican because I don't care about party labels. What I do care about is that they value evidence over a bombastic presentation. That they will critically analyze things that are said. That they'll critically analyze a bill or a policy or a candidate based on a lot more than just raw emotion. And we're all humans. We all respond to emotions. So we got to be careful of that. And we're all going to do it. But it's just a powerful weapon in your own intellectual gun cabinet. All right, your own intellectual armory. There we go. Your own intellectual armory. To know there's a difference between emotion, feeling, and facts. And far too often, we don't like facts. And that's one of the big things that keeps me in teaching, is I just think part of my job is to teach people to evaluate facts. Even if they disagree with me on opinions, to use facts to form their own opinions. If I can get them to use facts and be able to explain their own beliefs and why their own beliefs and so on, I think I've won. If I can get them to better their lives because they know something rather than they just work the local job, I think I've won. If I can get them to live a productive life, I think I've won. That's really what it's all about. So I'm coming in here to Mandan, North Dakota. I'll pick up here next week. I know this interstate driving is a little boring, but I felt like this trip should be done in its entirety just to give the difference between the states. Or across the state, I should say. After I get through North Dakota here, after I get past Bismarck, which is across the river from Mandan, you're going to see a big change in the state. It's going to be much less interesting for a while, But I have big things coming at the end of this video. You have many hours of good footage coming if you can put up with the cough syrup and the cod liver oil in the middle. And next week, the fireworks should be over, so I'll do my video on reading on a screen versus reading on paper. So I thank you for watching. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.